The deepest recipe for leading a vagally rich life is to find what you value and focus on that. It tends to be the case when we do that the threat biology reduces, and this kind of biology of contribution or creation or connection takes a sort of a bigger sweep over what's going on in our body. So the more time we can spend with that, the more depth we can, commit to our work to make the world a better place for other people and to achieve, important things, the more time we're going to spend in this vagally healthy state.
Today, we're joined by Steve Cole. Steve Cole is a professor of psychiatry and biobehavioral sciences and medicine in the Division of Hematology-Oncology at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. Here's our conversation with Steve.
So, Steve, welcome to our Presenter Spotlight series. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today ahead of our international gathering, The Vagus Nerve, A Path to Wellness. And I'd just love to start with hearing a little bit more about you, your line of work, your background. If you could just share a little bit more about what kind of drew you to this line of work.
Sure, happy to share. So, I basically study the everyday life of the human genome, or how essentially the world that we experience gets into our body and changes the way our, basic molecules of life work. And I got started in this actually back in the days of HIV infection, before we had good drugs for it. We knew that social world around us made a difference for these kinds of things. Gay men who were living in the closet got sick and died, 20 or 30% faster. And because it's a virus, we don't really it doesn't have a brain or motors or anything like that. Like, really, the only way you can analyze these things is as like little pieces of molecular biology, little packets of genes that get shunted into our cells. So I got good at molecular biology, trying to kind of map what HIV was doing, how it was taking advantage of our bodies, and especially when our bodies are under stress, what kind of molecular resources it was capitalizing on. And then along came the sequencing of the human genome, and we started being able to work on, sort of the genomic logic of things much bigger than a virus. And that's about the time I started looking at how life was affecting how our molecules work, not just a virus.
And how does from a molecular well-being standpoint, from your world, how does the vagus nerve factor into that, the biofeedback mechanisms? What does that look like for you and your work?
Great question. There's a couple of different ways, but essentially it all comes down to the power of the vagus nerve in pushing back against stress biology and in opening up space for resilience, essentially, physiologically speaking. So in many ways, we have come to live chronically stressed lives. This is actually, oddly enough, not the way we were built to live. Our hunter-gatherer, ancestors, actually were pretty chill about a third of the time. But that is not the way we lead our lives. We're not chill almost any of the time. And that leaves us very little time to do the restoration work that bodies really need. So we're kind of burning down our biological houses more or less every day, the way we live in the current world. And one of the few things that we have to push back against that is the psychological and social dimensions of safety. This sort of state of feeling not worried, not sort of under threat, not having to cope with the craziness of life. And it turns out that particularly a lot of human experience of safety and well-being is socially mediated. And that's one of the most interesting things about vagal biology, is the key role that the social world plays in sort of modulating that system, and that becomes a major highway by which social well-being makes its way into our body. And so we already know that social well-being, good social connection, social support, love, and pro-social activity, trying to make the world a better place for all of humanity or for people we care about, all of this kind of stuff has salutary effects on our body. We know this epidemiologically. And what we can do with these molecular toolkits is start to map out how that actually happens, both from a kind of, you can think of it as like a medical therapeutics perspective, but also in terms of just understanding the basic wiring of how humans are put together. How are we meant to live? What is the nature of a good life for a human being? And when do our bodies run the best they can? So these are all kind of, perspectives on what the vagus brings as a pathway for connecting the social world into the molecular biology of the human genome.
That's so interesting. And, in your line of work, what does that look like for you? What does safety look like for you on a molecular level when you're studying the human genome?
Well, one way to answer that question is to talk about what threat looks like. So we know that, human beings, when exposed to threat or even just uncertainty, you don't have to think that something bad is for sure going to happen. You just have to not be confident that good things are for sure going to happen. And whenever that happens, we don't have to ask for it. Our brainstem automatically switches on a package of fight or flight stress responses that include, sort of signaling through the sympathetic nervous system, release of norepinephrine around immune cells. And immune cells are programmed to respond to that signal by ramping up the production of inflammatory molecules and suppressing the production of antiviral molecules. And this program probably made pretty good sense when the things that gave us fight or flight stress responses were also going to injure us. So, if the saber-toothed tiger runs through the camp, that's a great time to turn on some inflammatory biology to deal with a wounding injury. You can fight viruses another day. The viruses, they don't get you from the saber-toothed tiger. The viruses get you from sitting around a fire with everybody else in the community and sharing food and sex and all that other kind of stuff. So that whole world of, you can think of it as like socially bonded biology. That should be the majority of our lives, but at the very least, we can deal with that later, defend against the wound right now. So what we have come to do is create a culture where we're constantly running this sort of threat biology system at a kind of a low simmer. But what ends up happening is we're running, more inflammatory biology and less antiviral biology all the time. And that inflammatory biology works like fertilizer for building heart attacks, neurodegenerative diseases, and metastatic cancers. It doesn't cause those things. It just grows those things better and faster once they occur. So if that whole world is working day in and day out, then our next question is like, how do we stop that? And it's actually not that easy. I mean, we can drug that system into submission. We've got beta blockers. But honestly, parking people on drugs for the rest of their lives just doesn't seem like the right solution. So the next question is like, how should I change my life? How should I change my everyday existence to not be running that kind of molecular soup of death all the time? And that's where the vagus comes in. That's where this world of, you can think of it as like social biology, getting into the autonomic nervous system and pushing back against that threat. Because this is one of the things that we know the vagus does very strongly, is it pushes back, literally almost like a tug of war over what our organ systems are going to do in our body. And so the more we can lead a life that invites a sort of energetic vagal tone, long periods of vagal engagement, the more we are going to be suppressing this fight or flight stress biology that we really honestly don't need for most of the things we confront in our daily life, right? I mean, it's not going to help me get promoted at work or, get my grant or get my book published or whatever if I'm running a sort of this strong, antibacterial response, right? We don't need that. It's not helpful. Once upon a time it was, back in the hunter-gatherer days, but not so much now. So let's not do that. And the best way to not do that is to plug into a social existence and an existence of kind of purpose and meaning and connection that ends up evoking naturally this more sort of health supportive vagal biology.
And yeah, that really triggered a different question for me. And you kind of hinted at it, but knowing what you know, what does that look like for your day-to-day life? How do you take your knowledge and input that into your everyday existence, as far as living a more resilient, vagal-wise life?
Well, the great thing about academics is we're always full of advice, but we never do it, right? And it's just because, like I do it, I run this crazy high stress life just because I'm, sort of addicted to getting things done, especially interesting things that other people find, sort of fascinating or rewarding or whatever. So I'm a terrible case study for how to live your life. But if you ask me how I should live my life, but never do, um, one of the big recipes is find a place to make a contribution, especially a contribution to other people that you care about. They don't necessarily have to be your family members. They could be the customers of your business. They could be the people you're enchanting with your performances. They could be a crowd of people who are trying to do something amazing in the world. They want to climb to the top of Mount Everest or understand better how, cancer works so that you can cure it. All of these things, though, are centered around a sense of value. In our brains, we've got things that we think are important and meaningful. And basically, I would say the deepest recipe for leading a vagally rich life is to find what you value and focus on that. It tends to be the case when we do that that the threat biology reduces, and this kind of biology of contribution or creation or connection takes a sort of a bigger sweep over what's going on in our body. So the more time we can spend with that, the more depth we can, commit to our work to make the world a better place for other people and to achieve, important things, the more time we're going to spend in this vaguely healthy state.
And so when you're focused on values and creating a life around those values, you feel like you would naturally sort of you're going to be looking, certainly from an evolutionary perspective at safety and threat, finding areas of work that you feel safe in or working in working environments that you feel safe in, which kind of brings up, the other part of our conference, which is polyvagal theory, obviously, pioneered by Dr. Stephen Porges. And just wondering how you think about polyvagal theory or, how that informs your work or day-to-day life.
I think the biggest implication polyvagal theory has for me involves this kind of, the poly in polyvagal, which is this sort of newfangled division of the parasympathetic nervous system that is so deeply embedded in social life. So I think of polyvagal theory as this big pipeline from the social world outside us into our basic molecular physiology, in a way that would allow us to essentially transform how our body is running, in coordination with what's happening outside our body. So it's a great adaptive feature. But what's distinctive about it is many of the adaptive features we have are, you can think of them as reactive or homeostatic. They wait for something bad to happen and then they try and repair it. What's really interesting about this sort of the social dimension that engages this, sort of polyvagal wing of the parasympathetic system is the extent to which, we do that proactively. We live with and for other people. We don't just wait until we've got trouble and then go seek out social support. This is like, a key fabric of everyday life for so many of us. And so this becomes exceptionally important because of the scope that it has within our individual lives as we experience them and as they take place outside it. And yet the extent to which that all connects back into what's going on inside us, including in some of the, sort of most deep reaches of our own biology and in kind of the, sort of genomic activity taking place inside our cells, deep inside the nucleus with all that DNA that makes us distinctively who we are. So this connection between the world outside and the good parts of the world inside, I think, is what's most significant about polyvagal theory for me.
And thank you for sharing, Steve. I appreciate that. And, that's what will be so great for our guests at the conference to hear your presentation, because you're going to be speaking about the vagus and our physiology from a molecular level. We'll also have other folks discussing the gut microbiome, treating trauma and addiction through the lens of polyvagal theory. And I'm just wondering if you could share a few thoughts on how you're feeling about the upcoming conference. I know it's a little bit of a ways away still, but what are you most excited for this October?
Well, I think I'm most excited to hear the other talks just because I love the synthetic nature of this conference and the way in which we can take what we're each doing individually and see how it connects to what else is going on in the body, interestingly orchestrated by this same neural network that, sort of connects the social world outside us to our physiological worlds inside. that's obviously got to play out on lots of different dimensions, as you mentioned, ranging from like, what are bacteria doing in our guts to, how is our heart functioning to how is our immune system regenerating our tissue? What does this all add up to? Not just in health, but in the rest of our physiology and normal development and behavior that we undertake. And then because this is so connected up to our conscious experiences and interpretations and values in the world, what are the ways that we can kind of, sort of trigger that system to be, sort of more active and health promoting in our everyday lives? So I really look forward to the connections, the ideas that I get to kind of connect up to what I'm doing in my own funny little world of genomic biology.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, and I really appreciate your insights here. I'm looking forward to seeing you at the conference this fall in October in Amelia Island, Florida. So Steve Cole, thank you so much for hopping on the segment here.
Sure, my pleasure. Great to be with you.